And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's March the 25th, the 84th day of this new year. Just 281 days remain to the year's over with, and we'll go start a new one. On the day's observances, International Waffle Day. Start your day off with a warm and crispy breakfast treat, topped with your favorite fruits. And American Red Cross Giving Day. Well, let's see what stories we have in the news for this March 25th. Well, there's been a ballot box upset. Democrats have flipped Florida legislative seat in President Trump's stomping ground in Florida. They flipped control of a long vacant Republican-held state house seat in a Palm Beach anchored district that includes Mar-a-Lago. That's President Trump's home turf. Associated Press reports Democratic Emily Gregory defeated Republican John Maples in a special election in Florida's House District 87. And the race to fill the seat left vacant last August when GOP State Representative Mike Caruso resigned to become Palm Beach County Clerk and Comptroller. Ballot box battle is one of the three special legislative elections being held in GOP-dominated Florida on Tuesday. And while the contest won't change balance of power in the state legislature, where for more than a quarter century Republicans have held majorities in both the House and the Senate, bragging rights were up for grabs in the president's home district. And for better or for worse, the Democrats won. Well, there's a big question going on right now. Who actually runs Iran? The key power players, as President Trump claims he is talking to the top official. On Tuesday, he said nobody knows who to talk to, describing what he portrayed as both a chaos and opportunity inside Iran's leadership. But we're actually talking to the right people. They want to make a deal very badly. His remarks came as the U.S. claims it's engaged in talks with a top Iranian figure, even as Tehran publicly denies negotiations are actually taking place. Question now is not just whether talks are happening, but whether anybody in Tehran has the authority to actually deliver. With U.S. Israel strikes on senior Iranian leadership and growing internal fractures, Iran appears to be operating less like a centralized theocracy and more like a wartime system run by overlapping power centers, with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps being at the center of the whole thing. Well, there's Department of Diplomatic Security Service has put out a poster offering a reward of up to $10 million for information on IRGC key leaders. They plan on continuing to remove the leadership one strike at the time. Well, Meta has been ordered to pay $375 million after a jury finds the platform enabled child predators in the landmark New Mexico case. New Mexico AG Raul Torres called the verdict a historic victory as Meta says it will appeal the ruling. The Mexico jury on Tuesday ordered Meta to pay $375 million after finding the company violated state law by misleading users about the safety of its platform and allegedly enabling child sexual exploitation. Jurors found that Facebook and Instagram, parent company, violated the Mexico consumer protection laws after a lawsuit brought by Attorney General Raul Torres, who accused Meta of failing to protect children from predators. And I've had dealings with the powers that be in New Mexico over the years. I can't say they've always followed the law. But we'll see what Zuckerberg does about this finding. Well, Mets legend Keith Hernandez says he still gets close to $5,000 a year in Seinfeld residuals. If Keith Hernandez ever stops calling the New York Mets games, he'll always have another source of income. The team's legendary former first baseman became a broadcaster for the team in 1999 and is a multi-time local enemy winner for his skills on the mic. But after he hung up the cleats, he tested out his acting skills. He's one of the numerous New York baseball stars to appear on Seinfeld. Played himself in 3 different episodes. His most famous appearance, though, came in the 2-part episode The Boyfriend in 1992, when he becomes a love interest to Elaine despite Kramer and Newman's grudge against him, stemming from a spitting incident on June 14, 1987. But as I say, he's still getting money. A Minnesota fire that killed the National Hockey League reporter and her 3 children is not believed to be intentional, according to officials. Deadly house fire in Minnesota that claimed the lives of an NHL reporter and her 3 children over the weekend doesn't appear to have been intentional, according to officials on Monday, citing preliminary investigative findings. The White Bear Lake Fire Department released a statement on Monday after the Saturday morning fire, and it claimed the life of 37-year-old Minnesota Wild correspondent Jesse Pierce and her 3 children. We're in the very early stages of the investigation, according to the press release. Our preliminary findings haven't led to any evidence that the fire was set intentionally. In fact, the cause of the fire is still under investigation. And the official cause and further information is going to be released once the investigation is complete. And let's see, Reacher star Alan Ritchson drops a cryptic enemy quote after an alleged front yard brawl with a neighbor. He's left fans divided after seemingly sharing a cryptic message in the wake of his front yard brawl. He can allegedly be seen throwing punches at his Tennessee neighbor as his kids watch from the street in a video obtained by TMZ. 43-year-old model-turned-actor took to social media on Monday as conflicting accounts of what led to the physical altercation emerged. He said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake," is a quote shared by Richardson on Instagram. His cryptic message didn't sit right with some of his comments. "Kind of like getting caught on camera being a bully," one user wrote. "Man, shame on you. True masculinity defends the weak and serves those around us. Not what you do. I stand against bullies. Come on over. You're welcome to try and bully me." The another one added, "Bro beat a guy's rear and Aura Farms afterward." Another one wrote, "Disgusting. Don't talk about church and Jesus ever again. You ought to be 100% canceled." Well, of course, he also got support. Brentwood, Tennessee police have closed the investigation, concluding the star acted in self-defense. That's according to the Hollywood Reporter. No charges are going to be pursued. Well, unearthed email reveals a Democratic senator's son who wanted Epstein to join his fund. Email said, "Enjoyed our conversation." Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, spent months hammering President Trump and his Justice Department over their handling of the Jeffrey Epstein records, accusing him of trying to sweep evidence under the rug and even teasing that his follow-the-money work ties back to Donald Trump. However, emails reviewed by Fox News Digital and DOJ Epstein files show Wyden's own family connection. April 2016 appointment at Epstein's Manhattan mansion between his son Adam and the disgraced financier came to light. Email chain from late April 2016, after it was already public that Epstein was a convicted child sex offender and was accused of operating under an underage sex slave ring, shows Adam Wyden sought investment backing from Epstein during a meeting at Epstein's home in Manhattan, where Epstein allegedly engaged in some of his criminal activity. Senator's son founded his own private investment fund, ADW Capital, in 2010. On the email, it says, "Jeffrey, I wanted to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I hope my passion and dedication for my business came through in the meeting. I live and breathe this business and take my returns, integrity, and reputation quite seriously. I believe I've got the mental fortitude and energy to stick through the tough times and drive value when others are fatigued. According to younger Wyden, in an email in April 2016 to Epstein, said, I intensely appreciate like-minded individuals and I very much look forward to having you join us at the fund. Well, the trail from Epstein led to some surprising places. And while the Democrats have done everything they can to point the finger at President Trump, more often than not, it comes back to them. Well, a Democratic governor attends a mosque led by an imam once accused of Hamas ties in a deportation case. New Jersey Democratic Governor Mickey Sherrill attended a Ramadan event at a Patterson mosque led by an imam who fought deportation for years over alleged ties to Hamas. The governor posted photos of her visit to the Islamic Center for Passaic County on social media, wearing a hijab, taking selfies. In one image, she's seen speaking with the mosque a longtime leader, Imam Mohammed Otanani. She wrote, thank you to the Islamic Center of Passaic County for welcoming me to join their celebration as the holy month of Ramadan comes to a close. I wish our Muslim neighbors a safe, joyous, and peaceful Eid al-Fitr. Qatanani, a Palestinian-born cleric, has been at the center of a decades-long immigration battle after federal authorities sought to deport him, citing alleged ties to Hamas and claims he failed to disclose a prior detention in Israel. He's denied those allegations, saying he was detained but never convicted. Well, there's an upcoming book that reveals President Trump admired Queen Elizabeth for being the opposite of me in one key diplomatic skill. Preview of the upcoming book, The Queen and Her Presidents, The Hidden Hand That Shaped History, revealed a key quality President Trump envied about the late Queen Elizabeth II. While America was born from a rebellion against the British crown in the 18th century, enduring historic ties between the U.S. and the United Kingdom have lasted through the centuries. Elizabeth's 70-year reign coincided with the tenure of 14 presidents across the Atlantic, some of whom made specific state visits to meet her specifically. President Trump was one of those presidents, and he spoke about his experience there with author Susan Page in a book that's going to be published on April 14th. In the book, Trump told Page about one conversation Queen Elizabeth never forget. He said, can I ask you who was your favorite president? The Queen reportedly said, why, they're all so good. He said, I know, but did you like Ronald Reagan the best? She said, yeah, I liked him very much, but they were all good. After asking her about former President Nixon as well and getting a similar response, Trump asked, so what do you mean you liked them all? She said, I liked them all. I can't say anything bad about any of them. They were great. So Trump recalled pivoting to ask about British prime ministers, asking if Winston Churchill was her favorite. She said, no, he was wonderful, Winston. They were all so good. They worked so hard. They were very different, but they all worked hard. Well, Trump said he was dazzled by her graceful social tact. Well, when you train for your entire life for a specific role in the world, it's not difficult to show tact. UNC fires Hubert Davis after historic NCAA tournament first round collapse against VCU. After the UNC Tar Heels collapse in the first round led to a quick exit out of the NCAA tournament, men's basketball head coach Hubert Davis is also heading out the door in Chapel Hill. 55-year-old coach was fired after a stunning defeat to the number 10 VCU Rams, who mounted the biggest first-round comeback in tournament history to ultimately defeat the number 6 Tar Heels overtime 82-78. School announced the move after ESPN reported Davis was fired. Well, Pritzker's glowing review of lakefront resurfaces after a college student was murdered by an illegal alien nearby. Illinois Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker recently highlighted the calm of Chicago's shore with Lake Michigan in a video he posted across his social media platforms. Nearby area where an illegal alien shot and killed a college student last week. He said in the video he posted on Facebook, a lot of runners coming by. Lakefront path, lakefront trail, absolutely gorgeous, just gorgeous. Look at that overpass. The tone of the resurfaced clip clashes with the death of Sheridan Gorman, 18-year-old Loyola University student who was shot to death near Toby Prince Beach Park area included in Chicago's Police District 24. Of course, in his media talks about it, he put the blame for the murder squarely on President Trump. Nobody's to blame for anything except President Trump. Craziest idea I've ever heard. Well, faster than sound passenger flights could soon return to the U.S. after a key House vote. The FAA banned supersonic passenger flights over land in 1973. But U.S. air travelers are soon embark on journeys faster than the speed of sound if a bill in the House of Representatives is taken up to the Senate. House voted to legalize supersonic flight in a decisive bipartisan vote on Tuesday, with the bill passing unanimously by voice vote in early evening. Supersonic passenger flights over land were banned by the FAA in 1973 over noise concerns. No such planes were ever manufactured in the U.S. by American-owned airlines. They were always by foreign companies. Well, there's a secret sale going on, and you see what you can buy early from Amazon's Big Spring Sale. The Amazon's Big Spring Sale starts on March 25th and runs through March 31st. I might also point out, if you go to Amazon Kindle and look up Ken Hudnall, you can see some of the 130 books that we've published over the years. This is a chance for shoppers to snag some of the cheapest prices of the year on spring cleaning, travel, fitness, and more during a nearly week-long event. That sale allows Amazon Prime members to save on everything from creator favorites to items that rarely go on sale. You also stock up on essentials, score seasonal fashion, and pick up some must-haves for upcoming holidays such as Easter. Well, Ryan Gosling's late-night TV rave sent a small Florida bakery into another universe. This small bakery is having a Hollywood moment, a surge of orders after actor Ryan Gosling gave it an unexpected plug on a late-night television show. The buzz began when Gosling appeared on Late Night with Seth Meyers and raved about a Tallahassee shop known for its homemade pastries. Actor singled out the cake shop, praising its Pop-Tart-starred treats and urging viewers to go buy them. Gosling's connection to the bakery came through a personal link. The sister of Saturday Night Live wardrobe supervisor Donna Richards actually owns that shop. During his interview with Myers, Gosling joked about the pastries, said they were a staple behind the scenes when he hosted Saturday Night Live. Well, at least Seth Meyers has found something he can do besides making his political views known on TV. We really don't care what the so-called stars think about politics. We watch them for entertainment, and they've yet to understand that. Well, according to Jesse Waters, Iran's now on a fix it can't bribe its way out of. It's used bribes in the past with money that the United States government gave it in many cases. Well, the Houston Rodeo was cracked down with a new dress code after a revolt about out-of-control attire. The Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo organizers are not fans of teeny jean shorts or ultra-low-cut tops and what they called inappropriate attire this year. Rodeo's organizers responded on March 16th to backlash on social media, started enforcing a much stricter dress code. Cowboy boots and hats are okay, but showing too much skin is definitely not okay. The rodeo's updated code of conduct said proper attire must be worn on HLSR showgrounds at all times, including skirts and appropriate footwear. They reserve the right to deny admission to or remove any person wearing attire that's considered inappropriate or attire that could distract from the experience of other guests. So if you're almost wearing something, they could ask you to leave. Well, a man's accused of timed beatings of his wife. He's now charged with murder after the woman's found dead in the river. Washington State man's facing a murder charge after his girlfriend was found dead in the river, as the victim's mother alleged a pattern of brutal abuse, including claims he once set a timer and repeatedly beat her in the weeks before her disappearance. Juan Manuel Delgado Jr., 42, has been charged with second-degree murder and the death of 37-year-old Christy J. Hunt, according to the Skagit County Sheriff's Office. Investigators submitted charging paperwork to the prosecutors on March 19th. In the weeks before she vanished, Hunt's mother told Seattle-based KING TV that her daughter described repeated violence. In fact, she did have a broken leg. Said he had boot stomped her leg and her chest, and said one time he set a timer and told her he was going to beat her every 15 minutes. Well, if you're going to resort to that, it's not much of a relationship. You ought to just throw in the towel and forget it. Cowboy star Dak Prescott's ex has posted about growth days after the couple split right before their wedding. Sarah Jane Ramos, the former fiancée of Dallas Cowboy quarterback Dak Prescott, appeared to be back in the gym days after the two split a month before they were supposed to get married. She posted a photo of herself with a friend along with an eyebrow-raising caption. "Growth in all forms," she said. It was one of her first posts on her Instagram story since the breakup became public earlier this month. Well, we're going to go to our main topic today. There's been a lot of, we've got a series called The Assassination Files. It talks about a lot of unexplained deaths. And one that has gained a lot of notoriety over the years was the death of Danny Casolaro. Took place in August of 1991. And we came out with a book not too long ago called The Octopus Network, discussing the mysterious death of Danny Casolaro. It's one of the cases that continues to linger at the edges of public memory. At the time, the official explanation seemed somewhat straightforward. He was a freelance journalist who'd been working on a complex story involving software and intelligence agencies and political intrigue. And while traveling to West Virginia to meet a source, he was found dead in a hotel bathtub. Authorities ruled the death a suicide immediately, and the case was closed. That seems to be the prevailing wisdom in regard to unexplained deaths. Default position, it's suicide. But stories don't always end when an investigation is declared finished. Casolaro believed he'd uncovered connections linking the controversial Promise, that's PROMIS, software dispute involving Inslaw, intelligence agencies, and political scandals that stretched across several decades. He referred to the network he believed he had discovered as the Octopus, hence the name of the book, The Octopus Network. Whether that network existed exactly as he imagined, it remains a subject of debate even to this day. What can't be debated is that Casolaro died before he could complete the story he set out to tell. The research files he reportedly carried with him to the Sheraton Inn in Martinsburg were never recovered, and the source he intended to meet was never been clearly identified. Well, in the years since his death, journalists, investigators, and historians have revisited that case repeatedly. Some conclude the official explanation remains the most plausible. Others believe the important questions were left unanswered, in some cases unasked. We don't intend to provide or even try to provide a final verdict. What we're trying to do is examine the events surrounding Danny Casolaro's investigation, the controversy involving Promise, and the strange circumstances of his final trip to Martinsburg. The goal is not to resolve the mystery, but actually present the facts, the questions, and the debate that continues more than 3 decades later. In investigations involving secrecy and intelligence operations and political power, the full story is rarely simple, and in most cases, it's rarely told. Sometimes the most important questions are the ones that remain. Now, it was the morning of August 10th, 1991. A maid entered room 517 at the Sheraton Inn in Martinsburg, West Virginia. What she found inside would quickly become one of the most controversial deaths in modern investigative journalism. The occupant of that room, freelance journalist by the name of Danny Casolaro, lay dead in the bathtub. Official ruling was quickly arrived at. Had to be suicide. To the authorities, the explanation was simple. Casolaro had reportedly been under stress. He'd been chasing a complicated story for months, maybe even years. According to investigators, he had simply reached a breaking point. From the beginning of the circumstances surrounding the death raised a lot of troubling questions. Casolaro had traveled to Martinsburg to meet a confidential source, somebody he believed could confirm the existence of a vast network of intelligence operations, political corruption, and covert programs he had spent months investigating. He had referred to that network by a name that sounded almost like something out of a spy novel. He called it the Octopus. He believed this network extended into multiple government agencies and private intelligence contractors. According to his research, that same individuals appeared again and again in scandals involving stolen software and covert intelligence programs and international arms deals and political manipulation. And if he was correct, the implications were enormous. When his body was discovered, several disturbing details emerged. His wrist had been cut repeatedly, more times than investigators normally see in a suicide case. His briefcase, which reportedly contained his research documents, was actually missing. And the source he had traveled to meet was never publicly identified. And a story he had been pursuing remained unfinished. Over the years, the official explanations remained unchanged. The case was closed at the time as a suicide. But the questions surrounding the death of Danny Casolaro have never entirely disappeared. And we don't claim to provide a final answer. Instead, we're attempting to examine the events surrounding his investigation, the network he believed he'd uncovered, and the strange circumstances of his final days. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones that end abruptly. And sometimes the truth disappears with the person who was about to reveal it. Now, Danny Casolaro was not the kind of journalist most people would expect to become the center of a mystery. He wasn't a celebrity reporter, and he didn't work for a major newspaper. Instead, he was a freelance writer, persistent, curious, and deeply interested in stories that seemed too complicated for controversial for traditional news outlets. Friends described him as intelligent and driven, but also intensely focused once he began pursuing a project. When Casolaro believed he'd found an important story, he followed it relentlessly. In the late 1980s, one particular investigation began to consume his attention. Now, at first, the story seemed unusually technical and obscure. It involved a piece of computer software developed by a small Washington-based company called Hudnall. That software was known as Promise, Promis. Originally designed to help prosecutors manage legal cases, Promise was unusually sophisticated for its time. It could track complex information across multiple databases and link seemingly unrelated pieces of data together. I guess you could say it was similar to AI. But according to the company's owners, the software had been illegally taken by the U.S. government. It began as a legal dispute between a small company and the federal agencies, soon turned into something far more complicated. As Casolaro began examining the case, he noticed something strange. He noticed the same names kept popping up, time and again. Government officials, intelligence contractors, private operatives. And every time he followed the trail further, the connections grew more complicated. He began to suspect the story was not simply about stolen software. He believed about something much larger, something hidden beneath layer after layer of government secrecy. Eventually began referring to the network he believed he'd uncovered by a single name. He called it the Octopus. Now, Casolaro's theory was simple. though its implications were staggering. He believed a small network of powerful individuals spread across intelligence agencies, government offices, and private companies, and quietly shaped major political events for decades, not just here in the U.S., but worldwide. To him, the connections looked like the tentacles of a giant octopus, and each tentacle reached into a different scandal or controversy. But at the center, he believed, the same people are always present. One of the most important pieces of the puzzle was the promised software. According to various reports, modified versions of the program have been distributed to intelligence agencies and governments around the world. Software's capabilities made it uniquely useful for intelligence operations. If altered correctly, it could secretly track financial transactions, intelligence files, or criminal investigations. In other words, it became a powerful surveillance tool. Some sources claimed that foreign governments had unknowingly purchased altered versions of Promise containing hidden access points that allowed intelligence agencies to monitor their data. Now, if this was true, it would represent one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations of the Cold War. Casolaro believed that Promise story was only one piece of the Octopus Network. He suspected connections to covert operations, political scandals, and intelligence programs that stretched back years. But proving such a theory required evidence, and evidence in the world of intelligence and covert operations rarely appeared easily. Still, Casolaro believed he was getting closer. By the summer of 1991, he was telling friends he had nearly solved the entire puzzle. All it needed was one final confirmation. In early August of 1991, he began telling several acquaintances he had arranged a meeting with an important source. This source, he said, possessed information that could confirm key elements of the Octopus Network. And he seemed confident. He reportedly told one friend he was about to break that whole story open. The meeting was scheduled to take place in Martinsburg, West Virginia. Now, it was certainly an unusual location for a meeting connected to an international investigation. Martinsburg is a quiet town in the eastern panhandle of the state, far removed from political centers of Washington, D.C., but that location may have been chosen deliberately. It was August 8th when Casolaro checked into the Sheraton Inn in Martinsburg. Brought with him a briefcase that reportedly contained a lot of his research documents. Friends later recalled that he seemed both excited and cautious. He believed he was about to confirm a story that had taken months of work to assemble. What he didn't know was that the meeting in Martinsburg would be the final chapter of his investigation. Well, it was 2 days later, on August 10th, that the investigation ended. Shortly after noon, August 10th, a hotel housekeeper knocked on the door of room 517. When she didn't get a response, she went in. Inside the bathroom, she found Danny Casolaro lying in the bathtub. The water in the tub was dark. His wrist had been cut. Authorities were notified immediately, and the scene was quickly secured. From the beginning, investigators treated the case as a likely suicide. Very little questioning of that determination. But several details began to trouble those who knew Casolaro. He'd been looking forward to the meeting in Martinsburg. Friends later said he seemed optimistic about his investigation, not despondent. The determination of suicide raised a number of eyebrows, of course. Then there were the physical details of the death. Reports indicated Casolaro's wrist had been cut multiple times. Even more troubling was the absence of something that should have been present. The briefcase containing his research documents was gone. The files he spent months putting together had simply vanished. If the documents had been removed before his death, someone else had been inside that room. And who that person might have been, and whether they were connected to the mysterious source Casolaro had come to meet, remains unknown. Officially, the case would soon be closed, but the question surrounding room 517 had only just begun. At the center of Danny Casolaro's investigation was a computer program that few people outside legal and intelligence circles had ever heard of. That was the Promise software. Developed in the late 1970s by the Washington-based company Inslaw, Promise, short for Prosecutors Management Information System, was designed to track criminal cases through complex legal systems. For prosecutors, of course, it was a revolutionary program. Software could connect information across databases and reveal relationships between cases that otherwise might have remained hidden. Prosecutors could track suspects and witnesses and evidence in court proceedings with far greater efficiency than before. One made promise powerful for law enforcement, also made it extremely valuable for intelligence agencies. With certain modifications, the software could track information across almost any data system: financial transactions, intelligence reports, government files, even communications networks. Castellaro began hearing disturbing rumors that promise had been altered and quietly distributed to governments around the world. And if that was true, the implications were enormous. Whoever controlled the hidden modification could potentially monitor the information flowing through those systems. And Castellaro believed this wasn't an accident. He believed promise had become a tool for international surveillance. He believed the people responsible were part of the network he called the Octopus. Well, the origin of the controversy surrounding promise began as a legal battle. Early 1980s, Inslaw entered into a contract with the U.S. Department of Justice to install the software in federal prosecutors' offices. But the relationship between the company and the government quickly deteriorated. Inslaw's owners claimed the Justice Department had taken their enhanced version of the software without paying for it. They alleged the government had effectively seized their proprietary technology. That dispute escalated into a lengthy legal fight. In 1987, a bankruptcy court judge issued a remarkable ruling. The court concluded the Justice Department had indeed taken the software through what the judge described as trickery, fraud, and deceit. And that ruling stunned observers. Rarely did a federal court accuse a major government department of such behavior. But more interestingly, the story didn't end there. Appeals and legal maneuvers followed. And behind the scenes, rumors continued to circulate that promise had already been removed far beyond its original purpose. Then in Castellaro, the legal case was only the surface. The deeper the story, he believed, lay in what had happened to the software after it left Inslaw's control. As Castellaro continued his research, he began hearing reports that modified versions of promise had appeared overseas. Unfortunately, the accounts were difficult to verify. Some came from intelligence sources, others from former government contractors. But the pattern seemed to be consistent. Foreign governments were purchasing sophisticated data management systems. Systems looked remarkably similar to promise. According to some sources, these versions of the software contained hidden access points. And if those claims were accurate, the developers of the modified software could potentially monitor information inside foreign intelligence or financial systems. To Castellaro, the possibility is extraordinary. It meant a small group of individuals could be quietly gathering intelligence from governments around the world. And if those same individuals were connected to covert political operations, the implications were even more disturbing. Castellaro believed the software had become one of the tentacles of the octopus. The software alone couldn't explain the entire network. And the more he investigated, the more connections he began to see. Connections reaching into some of the most controversial operations of the Cold War. During the 1980s, one of the most explosive political scandals in American history emerged, became known as the Iran-Contra affair. The scandal involved secret arms sales and covert operations carried out by members of the Reagan administration. For Danny Castellaro, the scandal raised new questions. As he examined the names connected to Iran-Contra, he noticed something unsettling. Some of the same individuals appeared in the promise story. Others surfaced in unrelated intelligence operations. Again and again, Castellaro found himself encountering familiar names. To him, the pattern looked increasingly like the network he had imagined. An interconnected group operating behind official channels. An octopus whose tentacles reached into multiple government programs. If he could prove those connections, he believed he could reveal something extraordinary. But unfortunately, the deeper he looked, the more dangerous the story seemed to become. Friends later recalled that Castellaro occasionally mentioned receiving warnings. Sometimes they came indirectly. Sometimes there were vague comments from sources who advised him to be careful. Investigating intelligence operations could be dangerous territory, but Castellaro didn't appear to be frightened. He seemed convinced he was on the verge of uncovering a major story. In conversation with friends, he spoke enthusiastically about the progress of his research. He believed he had nearly completed the puzzle. The Martinsburg meeting, he said, would provide the final confirmation. And after that, he planned to finish the book he'd been writing about the Octopus Network. Unfortunately, that book would never be completed. In the days after Danny Castellaro's death, investigators began examining the contents of room 517. Several personal items remained in the room. One object that Castellaro had reportedly carried with him was nowhere to be found: his briefcase. According to friends and associates, that briefcase contained many of the documents he had collected during months of research: notes, contact information, interview transcripts, possibly even evidence related to the Octopus Network itself. When police searched the room, the briefcase was gone. Authorities suggested it might simply have been misplaced or removed earlier. But for those who believe Castellaro had been close to exposing something important, the disappearance raised troubling questions. If somebody had taken the briefcase, they'd removed the only physical record of Castellaro's investigation. And if those documents had contained evidence of a powerful network, the motive for removing them would be obvious. Without those files, the full story Danny Castellaro had been pursuing vanished with him. The octopus, if it did exist, had slipped back into the shadows. Once the body of Danny Castellaro was discovered in room 517 at the Sheraton Inn in Martinsburg, local authorities moved quickly to determine the cause of death. The initial investigation was handled by the Martinsburg Police Department in cooperation with the Berkeley County Coroner's Office. And from the beginning, the scene appeared to suggest suicide. His wrist had been cut while he lay in the bathtub. Blood had pooled in the water, staining the porcelain basin dark red. No signs of forced entry were immediately visible in the hotel room. Investigators also reported finding a razor blade near the tub. Those elements seemed to support the theory that Castellaro had taken his own life. In a relatively short time, authorities publicly stated the evidence pointed toward suicide. But even before the investigation was complete, doubts began to emerge. Some of those doubts came from people who had known Castellaro personally. Others came from journalists who began examining the details of the case more closely. And the more closely they looked, the more questions began to surface. Well, several details about the death scene struck observers as unusual. For one thing, Castellaro's wrist had been cut several times. Now, in many suicide cases involving wrist cutting, individuals make one or two attempts before losing consciousness due to blood loss. Reports in the Castellaro's case suggested there were numerous cuts. Some investigators under questioned whether the pattern of injuries was typical of a suicide. Another point of concern involved the condition of the room. There were no clear signs of a struggle, but some items in the room appeared to have been moved or disturbed. And more troubling was the disappearance of Castellaro's briefcase. Friends reported he carried that case with him when he traveled to Martinsburg. It wasn't found among his belongings in the room, and nor was it recovered elsewhere in the hotel. If the briefcase had been removed before the investigators arrived, somebody would have had access to the room before police secured the scene. Whether that occurred remains unclear. But the missing briefcase became one of the most central mysteries of the case. The official autopsy concluded that Castellaro died from blood loss resulting from the cuts to the wrist. The report didn't find evidence of defensive wounds or signs of an external attack. On the surface, it did seem to suggest a suicide ruling. But critics of the investigation pointed out that autopsies often determine cause of death rather than the circumstances surrounding it. In other words, the autopsy could confirm how Castellaro died. It couldn't necessarily determine whether he had acted alone, though. Some observers also raised questions about the number of cuts on his wrist. Multiple cuts might suggest hesitation wounds, but the precise pattern of injuries remained a subject of debate among those who later reviewed the case. As time passed, forensic details became difficult to evaluate independently. Much of the original evidence remained within official files and was never released. But as the years went by, the ability to conduct new examinations diminished. Those who knew Danny Castellaro personally often expressed skepticism about the suicide ruling. He reportedly spoken with several friends shortly before his trip to Martinsburg, and in those conversations it sounded optimistic, not depressed. He believed he was on the verge of confirming the story he had spent months investigating. He also discussed plans for the book he intended to write about the Octopus Network. To many of his friends, his state of mind didn't match the profile of somebody planning to end his life. Some friends recalled that he had even warned him that his investigation might be dangerous. He didn't appear frightened, no. Instead, he seemed determined to finish the story. Those recollections fueled suspicions his death might not have been as simple as the official explanation suggested. Well, after Castellaro's death, journalists and investigators attempted to reconstruct the story he'd been pursuing. Without that briefcase and a lot of his research files, that task proved difficult. Some notes were recovered from his home. Others are pieced together through interviews with his friends and sources. But the complete picture remained elusive. He'd been chasing a story that connected software theft, intelligence agencies, international arms deals, and covert political operations. And whether those connections were real, misunderstood, or exaggerated still remains a matter of debate. But there is one fact that's certain. Danny Castellaro died before he could finish telling the story, and whatever connections he may have reached and whatever conclusions he may have reached disappeared with him. The octopus, if it existed, remained hidden beneath the surface. Its tentacles, real or imagined, still reached quietly into the shadows of power. Before traveling to Martinsburg, he had spoken with several friends about an upcoming meeting. According to those conversations, the journalist believed he had finally located a source capable of confirming the central elements of the story he had been pursuing for months. Now, the identity of that source has never been publicly confirmed. He reportedly described the individual as somebody with direct knowledge of the events surrounding the promised software controversy and the network of intelligence and political figures he believed were connected to it. For Castellaro, the meeting represented the final step in the investigation. If the source confirmed what he'd already suspected, Castellaro believed he could finally have the evidence necessary to publish his book about the Octopus Network. Friends later recalled that he seemed confident when discussing the trip, but he also appeared very cautious. Investigations involving intelligence operations and covert programs often involved individuals who preferred to remain in the shadows. And the shadows, by their nature, were difficult places to search for the truth. The events surrounding his final hours remained difficult to reconstruct. Hotel records confirmed that he checked into the Sheraton Inn, Martinsburg, on August 8, 1991. Employees later reported seeing him move through the lobby during his stay. He appeared calm and composed. The exact details of his meetings in Martinsburg remain uncertain. Some reports suggested he had arranged to meet somebody outside the hotel. Others claimed that a visitor may have come to his room. No definitive record of the meeting is ever produced, and because the investigation moved quickly toward a suicide conclusion, some potential witness accounts were never fully explored. Over time, the lack of clear information about Castellaro's final meeting only deepened the mystery. Who did he come to Martinsburg to meet? And what did they discuss? Those questions were never answered, nor were they even addressed. In the weeks following Castellaro's death, the case attracted glowing attention from journalists and researchers alike. Some of them were already familiar with the promised controversy. Others became interested because of the strange circumstances surrounding the death itself. Several investigators began reviewing the available evidence. They interviewed Castellaro's friends and colleagues. They examined the fragments of notes and documents that remained, and they tried to piece together the investigation that ended so abruptly. Now, the picture that had emerged, and the picture did emerge, was incomplete. He'd been chasing a complex story involving intelligence agencies and private contractors and covert operations. Without his missing files, much of the evidence he had collected was gone. What remained were outlines and hints and partially documented connections. But they were enough to raise questions, not enough to answer them, though. As journalists continued examining Castellaro's research, the scope of the story he had been pursuing became clearer. The octopus, as he had described it, was not a single organization. Instead, it appeared to be a network of individuals and institutions connected through shared operations and interests. Castellaro believed the network included intelligence operatives and private contractors and political figures whose activities overlapped across multiple scandals. And some of those scandals involved covert arms transactions. Others involved financial operations or intelligence programs. The promised software controversy, he believed, was only one piece of the larger puzzle. But each new connection he discovered seemed to lead to another, and each connection appeared to reinforce the idea that a hidden network of influence might exist behind official government structures. Whether that network truly existed or whether Castellaro had simply connected unrelated events still remains a matter of debate. But the scale of the story he'd been pursuing was undeniable. Danny Castellaro intended to write a book about the Octopus Network. That manuscript was unfortunately never completed. Instead, what remains today are fragments of research and recollections of people who spoke with him during the final months of his life. And those fragments suggest that Castellaro believed he had uncovered something significant. Without the missing documents and the source he'd traveled to meet, the full story may never be known. Over the years, journalists and researchers have revisited this case many times. Some have concluded Castellaro simply misinterpreted a series of unrelated events. Others believe he may have come close to revealing something far more complicated. The official record still describes the death of Danny Castellaro as a suicide. But more than 30 years later, the questions surrounding his investigation and the mysterious network he called the Octopus continue to linger. The unanswered questions remain where they've always been, in the shadows. After reviewing the available evidence, the authorities formally ruled Danny Castellaro's death a suicide. The conclusion was based primarily on the condition of the scene inside room 517 at the Sheraton Inn, Martinsburg. And the autopsy findings indicated that Castellaro died from blood loss after cutting his own wrist. Investigators stated that there were no signs of forced entry in the hotel room, no clear evidence that another person had been present at the time of the death. So to the officials, that case appeared straightforward. But for those who had followed Castellaro's work, the ruling didn't settle the matter. Some questioned whether the investigation had been thorough enough. Others believed the unusual circumstances surrounding his research warranted a deeper inquiry. The official conclusion closed the case from a legal standpoint. But for many observers, the questions still remain unresolved. In the years after his death, a number of journalists and independent investigators have examined that case. Some argued that the evidence supported the suicide ruling. They pointed to reports suggesting Castellaro had been under significant stress while pursuing his investigation. Others found aspects of the case difficult to reconcile with that explanation. The missing briefcase was a major issue. If Castellaro had been alone in the room when he died, what had happened to the documents he reportedly had brought with him? There are also questions about the meeting he had traveled to Martinsburg to conduct. The identity of the source he expected to meet has never been clearly established. Without that information, it's impossible to determine whether the meeting occurred or what may have taken place after the meeting. For critics of the official explanation, these unanswered questions continue to cast doubt on the conclusion reached by investigators. And while the circumstances of Castellaro's death remain controversial, the issues he investigated didn't disappear. The dispute involving Inslaw and the Promise software continued to attract attention in legal and political circles. Congressional committees examined aspects of the case. Reports and hearings explored the claims the software had been taken improperly and distributed beyond its original purpose. Now, although no definitive conclusion emerged regarding the broader allegations Castellaro had explored, controversy surrounding Promise remained one of the most unusual legal and technological disputes in the late Cold War period. For Castellaro, Promise had represented the first thread leading toward what he believed was a much larger network. Whether that network existed as he imagined it remains uncertain, but the controversy surrounding the software ensured that the questions he raised would not disappear entirely. Over time, the idea of the octopus became both a symbol and a point of debate. Some observers regarding Castellaro's theory as a compelling attempt to understand a series of overlapping scandals and covert operations. Others believed he had drawn connections between events that were unrelated. In complex investigations, both possibilities are always present. Patterns can emerge from careful research, but patterns can also appear where none truly exist. Castellaro's investigation occupied that uncertain territory. His work suggested a hidden network of influence might exist beneath the surface of political intelligence institutions. Without the full body of evidence he had assembled, that theory remains difficult to prove or even to disprove. So the octopus remains, in many ways, a mystery of interpretation, so to speak. In the end, the most important question surrounding Danny Castellaro's death may not be whether the Octopus Network existed exactly as he imagined it. The more enduring question may be simpler. What did Danny Castellaro believe he had discovered? By the summer of 1991, he appeared convinced he had nearly completed his investigation. He traveled to Martinsburg, expected to confirm the final pieces of his story. 2 days later, he's dead. Documents are gone. The story he'd been preparing to tell vanished with him. Whether his conclusions would have confirmed a vast network of covert operations or revealed something far less dramatic is something we may never know. But the questions he raised continue to echo long after the investigation ended. Well, investigative journalism often involves following threads of information through complicated and uncertain territory, and that path rarely leads directly to clear answers. Instead, it moves through fragments of evidence, conflicting accounts, and unanswered questions. Danny Castellaro's investigation was no exception. He believed he had uncovered connections linking software theft, intelligence operations, and political scandals into a single hidden network. And maybe he was correct. But then again, maybe he was mistaken. Or maybe the truth lay someplace in between these possibilities. What remains undeniable is that Castellaro died before completing the story he'd set out to tell. When investigators closed on the case, the questions remain that were never answered. In a decade since his death, the world of intelligence and technology has grown even more complex. Networks of influence, both public and private, continue to operate across the boundaries of governments and corporations and international institutions. In that environment, the questions raised by Danny Castellaro may still hold meaning, because sometimes the most important investigations are the ones that end before their conclusions are revealed. And sometimes the silence that follows tells its own story. Well, we also put together a timeline of the Castellaro investigation. It actually began back in the 1970s. That was when we saw the development of the Promise software by Inslaw for use in tracking criminal cases within the U.S. justice system. In the early 1980s, Promise software was adopted by elements of the U.S. Department of Justice. 1983 to 87, legal disputes emerged between the Inslaw and the Justice Department over alleged misuse and distribution of the Promise software. In the late 1980s, freelance journalist Danny Castellaro began investigating the Promise controversy and possible connections to intelligence operations. In the 1990 and 91, Castellaro expanded his research, developing the theory of a hidden network he refers to as the Octopus. On August 8th, he traveled to Martinsburg, West Virginia, to meet a source. On August 10th, 1991, he's found dead in room 517 at the Sheraton Inn in Martinsburg. Now, there were a number of key individuals associated with the case. Of course, Danny Castellaro, freelance journalist investigating the Promise software controversy and alleged intelligence connections. And then there are William Hamilton, co-founder of Inslaw and developer of the Promise software. And Nancy Hamilton, co-founder of Inslaw, who assisted in the legal battle against the Justice Department. And then, of course, this case involved various government officials, intelligence contractors, and investigators. Later appeared in reports connected to the Promise controversy and the allegations Castellaro was investigating. And the key question is, what was Promise, or Prosecutor's Management Information System, an advanced case management program developed during the late 1970s that allowed prosecutors to track complex legal cases involving multiple defendants, witnesses, and pieces of evidence. And that software, in the wrong hands, became an intelligence tool second to none. And that's what this whole case is about. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about some of the strange and unusual cases that Hudnall Files has investigated. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for The Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.